Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2020 Bibliometrics and Research Assessment Symposium. My name is Chris Belter, and I am one of the event co-hosts, along with my colleague, Yaling Liu. Before we get started with this particular session, I have a couple of quick reminders for everybody. We are recording the session, but again, recording is not going to include either the attendee list or the chat box, so please feel free to continue engaging in those and know that you're not going to be part of our recordings. Audio for all attendees and broadcast only, so all attendees are going to be muted throughout the session. So if you have any questions, please do let us know in the chat box, and please remember to send your questions to everyone. We do have folks monitoring chat, so sending your message to everyone will ensure that we actually see it and we'll actually be able to respond to it. Finally, live captions are going to be available in the multimedia viewer panel in the lower right of your WebEx screen, and they're also available in the URL that my colleague Candace Norton just sent out. So with that, we're going to jump into our next set of presentations. So this is going to be a panel session of librarians from a range of institutions talking about bibliometrics and research assessment services at various libraries. Up first, we have Judy Smith from the University of Michigan. Judy?
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Great.
All right. So thank you, Chris, and thank you, Yaling, very much. I am Judy Smith. I'm an informationist at the Taubman Health Sciences Library at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my great colleagues, Tyler Nix and Sara Samuel. Tyler and Sara are actually in the chat now, and we'll be monitoring for questions if you have them. So today I'll be talking about considerations for setting up a research impact service where the goals are primarily educational and consultative. Some of you may have heard Tyler speak on Wednesday, and he provided some examples of projects from our service. In this session, it will be a slightly different slant in that I'll be focused on how to think through setting up this type of service, and I'll provide some examples of our work along the way. The hope is really that these ideas and questions for consideration when starting out can inform your service, whether you're thinking about starting this kind of service or maybe you even have one in progress and you want to shift into doing more educational work. So I'll start out by talking about our Research Impact Core. We started in 2017, and our focus, again, is on education, consultation, and training. We really want to have our users choose indicators responsibly through helping them match their measurement needs to an appropriate indicator. We work with all of the schools and colleges in the health sciences, and we also partner with librarians across campus. We started with a library guide, as many of us do if you're in an academic library, and a couple of workshops that describe some basic indicators and tools to get us started, and we started out also with an alternative metrics workshop. And as the program has developed, we have some regularly scheduled workshops, such as a yearly workshop with our medical school offices, Office of Faculty Development, and also a few workshops a year at our North Campus Research Complex and Interdisciplinary Research Complex. In addition to these workshops, we do provide tailored individual and group consultations to faculty and students and staff, and we also cultivate cross-campus partnerships, such as partnering closely with the medical school over the years on our research information management system. And we sit on a campus-wide committee for research development that has representatives across campus. We're a team of 3, and our work in research impact represents about a quarter of our time. We each have different liaison areas and expertise beyond research impact. So when we began our service, we didn't think about it with specific steps in mind. I would say this process crystallized for us along the way. We started receiving more research impact-related questions ranging from things like publication counts at one end to understanding the impact of teams at the other end. We knew we wanted a service that would be sustainable. And so it made sense for us to start out with an education and consultation service. So this cycle represents what we've experienced in thinking through a research impact educational initiative, but it really could be applied to any research impact service you might want to set up. The cycle is ongoing, and as you can imagine, there isn't a real clear beginning point. Like many of you involved in these services, you move through each phase, and you're often doing all three at once. I'll start out by talking about understanding institutional culture. So understanding institutional culture is crucial, and we have learned a tremendous amount as we've moved along. You don't need to conduct a survey or do other research when you begin, but it does help to have a sense of the way that your campus and your users prefer to function and what might make your service sustainable. For example, you may want to serve as a consultant and educator, but if your clients have the expectation that you're going to run reports for them every month, then you may need to switch gears. You'd also want to think through which clients you want to be partnering with. If you're at a small institution, then this may not be as much of an issue. But for example, where we are, University of Michigan is a massive community, and we really needed to think through where to begin, who's most receptive to these conversations. So we found it was helpful for us to begin cultivating our service with workshops and with populations we knew well, and then expand out. Finally, you want to consider how they like to work. Again, coming back to whether they want you to run reports for them or they're more open to education. That was a concern for us, that we weren't sure what people wanted. But as we worked with more and more people, we realized that people are interested in the consultation role to achieve their goals. So in addition to having an ongoing grasp of your institutional culture or cultures, depending on where you are, it can be helpful to think through your learning process. And by learning process, I'm talking about both collection resources and also human resources. It can help to have some core resources available, and I have a few listed in the next slide, but don't let that stop you. You don't need to be incredibly highly resourced in order to provide this type of service. You can still orient your users to the conversation surrounding research impact metrics, even if you don't have access to a large number of tools. Also, you don't have to have a team, but if you do, having a team with a diverse set of skills can help enhance your learning process. You can think about, do you want to all learn the same things? Are you splitting up tasks? We have split up some tasks among us based on interest and skills, and we found that that works for us. You may also want to think proactively about what you need to learn and how to keep current. Like much of our work as informationists or librarians or other information workers, we found we learn a lot as questions arise, but we really had to be intentional about our learning. We recently started a quarterly journal club at our library so that we could not only bring colleagues into our learning process, but really to hold ourselves accountable. And another way to hold ourselves accountable, which is easier said than done, is, we have weekly meetings, and our plan for the upcoming year is to, at those weekly meetings, to have even just a few minutes to talk about something we've read or something we've learned. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. And in broad brushstrokes, this is our learning process, and of course, it's not as linear as we have it laid out here, but it roughly characterizes how we think about our development in terms of learning. So we started out learning some foundational tools. Again, your resourcing will depend on where you are. You could start out, if you don't have Scopus, Web of Science, massive interdisciplinary tools, subscription-based, you could look at Scholar, you could look at Dimensions, so you're not limited. If you have a a research information management tool at your school. It helps to know the ins and outs of that tool. And all that foundational learning will help you take a deeper dive into indicators. That foundational learning allowed us to be more fluent in speaking about field normalized indicators, and that in turn was helpful for us to be able to educate people on the fact that, citation counts are not equal across fields, and you're comparing apples to oranges that way. So all of it helped us, and then knowing those foundational tools and those indicators really helped us have a more sophisticated conversation about matching those indicators to needs. In addition to the ongoing learning process, there's the ongoing question about how you're going to implement your services. I talked about the team in terms of learning, but it can help to think through the most effective way to answer the questions that arise. How are you going to organize yourself? So we often like to tag team because we feel we bring different skills to the table. That's not always possible, of course, in terms of scheduling. But we do like to do that whenever possible. Another aspect of implementation that we think about is, and that you can think about, is the role you want to play in your library or other institution. We have a very large library system where other librarians partner with units beyond the health sciences, and we actively partner where it makes sense. For example, we have a research impact librarian, Becky Walzenbach, at the main campus, and so we are in close contact and collaborate with Becky and others. So that is something to keep in mind. Another question to think through is your approach to answering questions, and I'll talk about that a little more later. But we find that with an education and consultation service, it's important to think about how to manage expectations and how to negotiate if there are people that really want reports made for them, but you're not able to do that because you may not have the resourcing. Again, I've said that we have found on our own campus it has not really posed a problem for us. And at the same time, there are times when we do leave them with a template to follow, or we connect them to users across campus. So we always want to start out with what we can do for them, not any limitations in not providing reports. So what we would say is that if you are thinking about this type of service, to be comfortable with negotiation and managing expectations. You'll also want to think through how you will create cross-campus partnerships. We have found offering workshops at our interdisciplinary research complex and to other units on campus have really been the building blocks for those partnerships. And creating those cross-campus partnerships is really crucial, and we suggest prioritizing it. And no matter what type of service you want to provide, you want to think about those long-standing relationships. And this term of social interoperability is not something we coined. It's part of a report and a webinar created by OCLC, and you may have read the report or gone to the webinar. But in the webinar, they talk about social interoperability and building and creating, maintaining these ongoing relationships as the counterpart to technical interoperability. So while technical expertise is crucial, of course, your service will likely not gain traction if you are not working towards creating and maintaining these relationships, or like Lizzie Gadd mentioned on day one, making friends. And we found, and this is no surprise here, it's obvious that all of this takes time, but it's worth the investment. And the way that you build your presence will depend on your own institutional culture, your resourcing, but the takeaway is to be intentional about the process, because it's easy to, as I've said, get caught up in day-to-day, and also to get caught up in some of the really amazing tools that are out there. But by being proactive through multiple means, you can expand your reach with your work. Couple of examples for us, I've mentioned our research information management system. We sit in on meetings of the governance board, the stakeholders for that tool, and that has opened opportunities for us in terms of providing workshops across campus to that particular tool. We also are part of a University of Michigan Office of Research Development Committee, and through that work, it has developed into a research impact subcommittee that will be co-chaired by me and by our research impact librarian on campus. Another attribute of our implementation is the approach that we take to consulting, and we like to say it's a prepare, listen, and respond approach. And this approach is something that we've grown into, and it's actually something we heard about from a leader on our campus talking about something different, not having to do with research impact, but talking about how to create impact. And the impact he was talking about was how to work with, how policy researchers can consult with legislators. The takeaway is that you don't want to come to the table thinking that you know everything, and you want to listen carefully because some of what you're seeking to educate on can potentially challenge views on what they want to measure and what they want to do. So you want to prepare, but you want to be really poised to listen, and you may not want to have a ready-made list of how you're going to respond. You can always do that afterwards. So when we work with people, that is the approach we like to take. And we like to also introduce and reinforce responsible use of indicators whenever possible. So are they thinking about, for example, what it might mean if they want to reward faculty for being first authors when we know that other people in that list of authors may have contributed greatly to a particular publication? Okay, so I want to very quickly just mention a few types of questions that you might get with your education and consultation service, or really with any service, but I'm thinking of it in terms of education. So one question that comes up, I think that comes up for all of us, is mismatch of indicator to need. So for example, when people want to use journal impact factor to assess the quality of individual articles. Something to keep in mind is that you may mention DORA and you may try to steer them towards the article level indicators, but there may be pushback. So that's something just to keep in mind when you're educating. We had one researcher, in fact, tell us that DORA was just wrong. So being aware that there may be some pushback is something good for you to have in your back pocket. Another type of question to keep in mind is when you're being asked to assess a new initiative. So in this case, in this one instance with the medical school, we steered them toward alternative metrics where they could quickly gain some information about the attention that they were getting in social media. And we also worked with them on planning for the future. We brought to their attention the metrics toolkit and the Becker model so they could look at a really wide range of indicators that are available. Another kind of question that you might get or role that you might play is to serve as a connector among pre-existing groups at your institution. We worked with a group of centers and institutes on our medical campus that were trying to figure out which indicators to use. So we met with them in person and online with the team and also with IT on campus. And we served as somewhat of a translator of that group's needs. And that work is ongoing. A final type of question that I think we all receive is how to increase impact. And when we get that type of question, we try to steer the conversation to and reframe the conversation to making themselves more discoverable, more visible through their online presence, ORCID, for example, and through making good publishing choices. We don't want people to inadvertently game the system through self-citation or other means. Finally, we would suggest if it works for you to plan strategically, and only if it works for your team. We found that we had so many items on our to-do list and our parking lot that we really needed to step back. And this worked for us because this was strategic planning was something that we chose to do, not something handed down to us, and it helped us plan for the upcoming year. So thank you very much, and please be in touch with us at any point. We would be happy to talk to you and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. We have a lot of discussions on the chats already, and I'm afraid that we have to move on to our next panel. So please go to our chats and enjoy the conversations. All right, thank you.
Yes, thanks again, Judy. That was great. So at this point, we're now going to move on to our next set of presenters, which is really from a team of folks from our Canada, starting out with Marisa Ruccolo from Clarivate to talk about research metrics literacy. So Marisa?
Thank you for joining us today. We're a team from north of the border, so I will share my slides. So my name is Marisa Ruccolo. I am the Solutions Specialist at Clarivate for Canada. I am joined by Heather Cunningham from the University of Toronto Libraries, Thane Chambers from the University of Alberta Library, and Andrea Szwajcer from the University of Manitoba Library. I'm joining you today from Montreal and would like to acknowledge the Ganawake-Mohawk First Nation territory. So as a bibliometric provider, we would like, I'm sorry. Apologies, this should be good. We would like to, it's our responsibility to provide the responsible metrics, literacy, and as a best practice, and finally, so that this knowledge then is translated or into tangible features into Web of Science and Insights platforms. So ISI publishes these scientific reports, and ISI is really the University of Web of Science, and its mission is to disseminate knowledge externally through events, conferences, and publications, and it carries out research to sustain, extend, and improve the knowledge base. In the first report, Profiles Not Metrics, this was published in January of 2019, we address the impact profiles, which is really to understand the context behind the single value of the category and journal normalized citation impact by showing breakdowns, or as we say, buckets, including the publications of one or more institutions. And this includes also uncited publications. So this has now made its way into our insights and benchmarks and analytics in the recent months. So we're really excited to offer this to our users. In the same report, we also address beam plots, which is really a fair analysis of a researcher's articles into context for suitable for fair comparison. So an alternative to the H-index that So it's a graphical representation of the citation performance, and its feature is expected to make it into our products in 2021. So the result is really a normalized percentile that is normalized by publication year, document type, and field. Another report I'd like to mention is the multi-authorship research and analytics, which really sheds light onto the importance of international collaborations. Adding one additional country on an article has really a greater benefit than adding one additional author. And last but not least, and really hot off the press, just launched this week, we have our new open source LMS on Bibliometrics. So I've included the link on the slide. So we're really excited. A shout out to our digital education team and Tracy Matthews. So really you would find a lot of definitions of bibliometrics and considerations, talking about our data and understanding absolute, so quantitative versus qualitative or impact metrics and normalized metrics. So I hope you will be able to incorporate this into your institutional endeavors for research for metrics literacy. So I'll hand it over to Heather.
Oh, thank you, Marisa. So, good afternoon, everyone. I am speaking to you from Toronto, which I will acknowledge is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. So, bibliometric or research metrics literacy, which includes responsible use of metrics, is an interesting concept. So, like other literacies, such as information literacy or data literacy, it spans out to many parties in an academic setting, so the library, faculty, students, other researchers, departments, funders, and vendors. And with regards to responsible use of metrics, the library can sometimes find itself in a gray area. So, for example, CARL, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, is a signatory to DORA, and so my library, which is a CARL library, is therefore a signatory to DORA, but my university is not. In 2017, the Association of European Research Libraries issued a report, The Leiden Manifesto Under Review, What Libraries Can Learn from It, which stated, libraries are an important hub of bibliometric practices as well as indispensable drivers of responsible research assessments. Libraries need to build awareness first and then advertise their services. So in the vein of building awareness, for the past 3 years, my library has been engaged in the educator role, and to incorporate from the image Chris Belter showed on day one, by offering an open workshop to anyone at the university on research metrics and researcher identity, which is a 2-part 5-hour workshop in which responsible use of metrics literacy is woven into each part of the workshop, so at the article, journal, researcher level. And when I ask if any of the attendees has heard of the impact factor or H-index, almost everyone has, but very, very few could describe what they measure, and so far no one has been able to articulate before the workshop about the context or limitations, even though the attendees feel or have been told that these are very important values and they're expected to supply them at some point. So I spend time talking about various models and frameworks such as Becker, which was mentioned before, to think about one's research and possible indicators of impact. So one that I pull in is the University of Toronto President's Research Impact Award, since this is for faculty in all disciplines whose research has led to impact beyond academia. So for example, on society, culture, the economy, quality of life, the environment, or public engagement. So I use this as an example of what our specific university values in its researchers and suggests to the workshop attendees to use the nomination criteria as a framework for crafting their own impact story or thinking about their own journey as a researcher. And the workshop has its own section where the context of metrics is discussed and positioned from what can I as an individual do. And through this, we are working towards meeting one of the 5 design principles from DORA's Rethinking Research Assessment, Ideas for Action, which is fostering a personal accountability in faculty and staff. And that was on the next slide. Sorry, I'm not the slide driver here. And so I will pause now and thank everyone for listening to me and turn it over to Thane.
Thank you, Heather. My name is Thane Chambers. I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of Indigenous and Métis peoples. I recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and have much gratitude to those whose territory I reside on. So I'm going to be speaking to you not so much about metrics literacy, but more about a movement that's happening on our campus that hopes to redefine what research impact means. So the University of Alberta is really very typical of most medium to large research universities in North America. So definitely research impact and research assessment is something that exists on our campus, but it's also something for which there are no official or consistent policies or procedures. So basically this means that we have half of campus who thinks that research impact is only H indices and the journal impact factor. And we have another half who just get stressed out and sometimes even angry when the term research impact comes up. But just to be clear, we definitely have some faculties who value and encourage non-bibliometric types of research impact. But really there's this widely held campus belief that what is valued by the university and its administrators are bibliometric indicators. We can just move on to the next slide, please. So basically a bunch of stuff has happened recently in the past year or two. The library launched its research impact service and we did a campus-wide needs assessment. We were tasked with doing this really big project at the beginning of our launch, which got the attention of some people. We had some changes in leadership, and so there's basically more talk and more questions around research impact. And there's really a sense that something had to change. So next slide, please. So on our faculty, on our campus, the faculty evaluation or the performance appraisal of faculty members is defined at the faculty level. And this is really seen as a driver of how research impact is understood. We have a central committee, University Research Policy Committee, and it created a subcommittee on research impact. And this subcommittee has been tasked with developing a common understanding of research impact. So I sit on that committee just as a guest, along with 7 associate deans of research and one of our associate vice presidents of research. And so at first, when we first met, we thought we could do a policy change, but we realized that that was just going to be too much work and too complicated. And also, if what we wanted to do was change culture, doing something from the top down may not be that effective. So we thought maybe conversations, getting people to talk more about research impact could begin this change process. So we're about to launch a white paper. In the white paper, research impact includes impact inside and outside of academia, and really the focus is on the outside part. Research impacts are defined as being diffuse, as taking time and being difficult to measure. In the document, there's no mention of metrics, not the H-index or journal impact factors, and there's also no need to measure these impacts in this document. So we hope that what will happen is that now people have a document that they can use to push for a more holistic approach towards faculty evaluation, and that this will bring about cultural change. That's it for me. Andrea's next.
Hi, I'm Andrea Szwajcer. I come from the University of Manitoba, the Treaty 1 territory, and the traditional lands of the Cree, Oji-Cree, Anishinaabe, and Métis peoples. At the University of Manitoba at present, our services can be summarized as being decentralized and largely delivered at the first and second tiers of service, namely education and some consultation. Within some departments, there are staff that have some responsibilities in seeking metrics to support administrative requests. We do not have a CRIS that integrates scholarship-generated metrics. Next slide, please. Our culture of research impact metrics at the university can be defined by the 2016 faculty legal action, where the faculty associated campaigned to eliminate the inclusion of metrics as a requirement or expectation of individual promotion and tenure submissions and annual performance evaluations. The result of the mediation was the formation of a joint committee However, no collective agreement language was reached. The committee released a report in January 2019 outlining a set of principles or basic best practices for metric reporting. There has been no centralized initiative since this report. Consequently, there has been no obvious resolution or direction to address the underlying feelings regarding metric use, namely the perceived lack of procedural justice in their use. Procedural justice as core to faculty perceptions is presented by the paper by O'Connell et al. Cited here. My colleague Sherry Volke and I have discussed our institutional case study at more length in our LIBRA presentation and explore our thoughts about the role of librarians in assisting in achieving procedural justice regarding metrics. Next slide. We believe that the following objectives would be helpful to resolving procedural justice issues regarding research impact. With respect to DORA, we share the same tension that Heather has expressed. The University of Manitoba Libraries is a member of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries and therefore a signatory to DORA. To my knowledge, the institution of the University of Manitoba is not. To become a signatory, there needs to be a conversation about the discipline, interpretations, and values regarding research metrics and its relationship to scholarship, and that both the University of Manitoba Faculty Association and the University Administration need to be engaged in this conversation. As part of developing a formal service, we hope to develop a responsible use statement that may serve as a foundation to that conversation. We look to our colleagues at the universities of Toronto, Waterloo, and Alberta who have established some leadership here. Internal to the libraries, as we redefine and centralize our services, one of the priorities identified by the Research Services Digital Strategies Unit is to develop a consistent suite of bibliometric services available across all disciplines and support continuing education librarian education to provide advanced support. Next slide. So on behalf of all of us, thank you, and we're happy to take questions.
It looks like all of the questions have been answered in the chat already. So I think we're good here, and maybe we can move on to our next panel.
Sure. If there aren't any other questions coming through, I guess we can move ahead. So thank you once again to all four of you for a really great presentation. We really do appreciate it, and I agree that metrics literacy is definitely something that we need to be pushing a lot more in libraries. So I'm glad to have this particular panel on our session today. So the final presentation in this panel on library services is going to come from Sharon Cable of the NIH National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, talking about author profiles, unique identifiers, and bibliometrics. So Sharon, are you there?
So sorry, I did the rookie mistake of muting myself.
Not a problem.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Wonderful. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on author profiles, unique identifiers, and bibliometrics at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences at a government research institute. I'm Sharon Cable. I'm the Library Fellow at NIEHS, and I'm going to present on several projects related to bibliometrics that we did in the library. My outline for today is fairly simple. I'm going to start with who we are and the structure of our institute, which will give context for the projects. Then I'll go through two projects, one on author profiles and the other on our bibliometrics. And then I'll walk through what didn't work and then what worked for us. As a side note, these slides will be available later, and I've included a lot of additional examples and links in the speaker notes. So firstly, who we are and who we serve. We are the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. We are in RTP, North Carolina, and we're one of 27 institutes within the NIH. We also serve the National Toxicology Program, which is an interagency program shared with the FDA and the CDC. When I talk about users in this talk, I'm referring to two specific groups. In the library, we serve everyone at NIEHS and NTP, but specifically today, I will be referring either to principal investigators, who are individuals who run their own labs or groups, and then laboratory chiefs, who are exactly what they sound like. They run their labs and they oversee the work of PIs and many other personnel. So our first project is on author profiles and unique identifiers. Senior leadership at NIEHS has required that all of our PIs register for a MyNCBI bibliography, an ORCID ID, and a Web of Science researcher ID. And I'll walk through what this process looked like in the library. MyNCBI bibliography is a collection within PubMed where you can save or claim publications of yours. Most of our PIs had one already, although some needed to add some of their more recent publications. This step was comparatively simple to the other two because our PIs tend to be heavy PubMed users. So at the least, the interface of MyNCBI is familiar to them, and that counts for a lot. To create or update MyNCBIs, we didn't even need our users to come to the library. We offered to set up one-on-ones with them, but generally people just emailed us and we sent them directions on how to make sure their MyNCBI was up to date. The second required identifier was ORCID ID, which is an author identifier and disambiguation system. Many of our PIs had one already as part of a grant or a publishing requirement. Not all of them were aware that simply creating an ORCID does not automatically add their publications. This is where we were able to show them how much time and work the library can save them. We already knew that MyNCBI collections can be exported to a reference manager like EndNote, and in this process we realized that ORCID accepts BibTeX files for batch uploads. So we used the PI's up-to-date MyNCBI, exported all of those records from MyNCBI to EndNote, we cleaned up the data, and then re-exported it as one BibTeX file. Again, what was great is that users didn't have to come to the library for this. They reached out to us if they had questions, and then within usually a day, we were able to respond with the BibTeX file of all their publications and very simple instructions on how to upload it to ORCID. Lastly, we have Researcher ID, which is an author profile system within Web of Science. Web of Science is a compilation of several databases and tools owned by Clarivate, and there are a lot of built-in research management and visualization tools. Researcher IDs were the most difficult to set up for our PIs. After the usual steps for account creation, our PIs had to run an author search for their name, select all of their publications to claim them. The problem is that results could be displayed only 50 at a time. This would not have been an issue for a newer researcher, but our PIs usually have high numbers of publications. Web of Science also includes content PubMed does not, like meeting abstracts and books. So there were usually many, many more results to sift through for Researcher ID. For this process, we did have to meet with everyone one-on-one. We could do a lot of the work for them, but generally there was a lot to explain, and the critical part is that the PIs had to be the ones to claim their publications. We couldn't do that for them. One of the researchers summed up a lot of the frustrations with this, the interface, the number of steps, the perceived redundancy, by saying that he felt like a trained monkey. So a lot of the work we were doing was to alleviate those pressures. Okay, so project number 2 of 2, which is really a whole umbrella of projects. A primary reason for requiring those author IDs was so that our institute could more easily demonstrate research impact. So now that we have those 3 required IDs, I'm going to show you some examples of how we use them and the services we provided. I'll walk through the types of projects we support, our level of involvement, and then get to some actual examples of bibliometrics. So the 2 types of projects that are covered in my presentation are the Board of Scientific Counselor Reviews, or BSc reviews, and Tenure Track Investigator Reviews, or TTIs. BSc reviews are reviews of our laboratories that take place about every 3 to 4 years, and TTI reviews are reviews of our individual tenure track investigators. We prepare numerous reports on our research metrics and impact for the individual investigators as their reviews are announced. Both of these types of reviews should demonstrate research impact and collaboration. Before 2016, the library's level of involvement was remarkably different. We were not really involved in the TTI reviews at all, and the extent of our involvement with lab reviews is that somebody would come down the day before the review with a list of publications and ask for some time-cited numbers. Now, we are plugged into the entire process for both types of reviews. For BSc reviews, we actually start months before anything even formally begins by collecting and verifying all of the laboratory publications. We're also responsible for almost all bibliometrics generated or requested for these reviews. We receive advance notice for which labs or investigators are up for review next, and this gives us crucial lead time to collect publications and verify information. Briefly, this is what our workflow looks like for these reviews. All of our work tends to be collaborative in the library, but these projects in particular are very much so. We keep each other updated, we share tips and training, and we always double check each other's work as is needed. This is a chart of the tools that we use to manage and clean and generate our research impact data. And you can see I start with the author IDs. Having these up-to-date author IDs enabled us to do the rest of the process better, the data was more meaningful, and we were able to do it faster. Finally, here are some examples of the final product, Bibliometrics and Research Impact Visuals. Stacey is our Bibliometrics lead, and she actually learned to make network graphs at a past NIEHS Symposium, which was pretty exciting. So she made Figure 1, which is a network graph of collaborations for one of our laboratory reviews back in 2016. It generated high interest during the lab review, and it has been requested constantly since then. Network graphs are particularly valuable for us because they show not just the research universe of the collaborators, but also the frequency of collaboration. The figure below, Figure 2, shows internal collaboration, which is another important metric for us, which is when the lab co-authors publications with other people or labs within our institute. Collaboration in general is very important for us, so we usually try to show it in several different ways. Heat maps we make with Tableau, and interactive maps made with Google Maps are another way that we show that. This time we emphasize the geographic location of the co-author affiliations. A publication level metric we've been working on is primary authorship. That is the publications where the authors or author under review are either the first or the last author listed. Primary authorship is something that our leadership uses to gauge the role or level of contributions that the authors have. We can find these publications a couple different ways, either with a first or last author search in PubMed, or simply reviewing the publications that we've already verified and that are sitting in an EndNote library. The final products are usually what you see here, a bar chart, and then a Word document with the names bolded or highlighted, however the lab chief requests. In the category of metrics, difficult to capture with quantitative data points, we have acknowledgements. This metric tracks papers that have thanked the lab that is under review. We find these papers in one of two ways. We search MS Manager, which is our internal review software, and/or we search PubMed Central and Science Direct. The reason we use those two databases is because they allow full text searching. Acknowledgements typically isn't a field that you can search just by itself, so we need the full text. A Word document is not as visually catchy as the previous visuals, but it is a metric that we provide that captures nothing else. It is very unique. And then publication compliance is more in the vein of a service that we provide, rather than a strict research impact metric. Our authors have publication guidelines, and for the sake of time, the important thing to know is that all of our peer-reviewed publications should have a PMID and a PMC ID, which are ID numbers attached to an article when the article is in PubMed and PubMed Central. There are a lot of ways that this process can go wrong, and publications without those IDs usually cannot be counted in our reviews and bibliometrics. Because we're involved so closely and so early on with our reviews, we're able to catch these articles with missing IDs, identify what the issue is, and then send progress reports to the lab chiefs or the PIs. We're able to tell them exactly what steps need to be taken and how much of the process we can do for them. On to my last part on our lessons learned. So first, the challenges. Changing technology is a perennial factor in anything that we do. As one example out of many, Researcher ID is no longer a standalone interface within Web of Science. It's been folded into publons. The login area and the interface are now slightly different, which can be frustrating for some of our users who just got used to something new. By different priorities, I mean that each review had its own quirks and its metrics it wanted to emphasize and that we had to consider. Some of our lab chiefs wanted to show internal collaboration more or less, and some of our PIs had more than one lab affiliation. So then we needed to have a conversation about which publications would count for which review. Technological literacy for us falls under the umbrella of customer service. While we librarians may be curious about the process of what we do, our users usually wanted to get back to the lab and their work as quickly as possible. We have to be careful that we did not over-explain the why and that our outreach and our instructional materials were concise and up-to-date. Lastly, there was a widespread belief that these author ID tools were redundant. Many people at our institute use Google Profiles, which is an author ID system that does a lot of the work for you, especially by automatically adding your publications. Google Profiles has a bit of a quality control problem, but that ease of use is what a lot of our users are used to. So there was a lot of confusion about the difference between these different author ID systems and what they did or didn't do. For example, ORCID updates automatically only if you include your ORCID number in the publication when you submit it. And by way of a final conclusion, here are some of our successes. We keep a lot of documentation, not only on the scope of the projects, but detailed instructions on how to do each step and what the deadlines are. I mentioned earlier that our projects are very collaborative, and that's connected to that. We want to make sure that we each know what everyone else is doing. We're a small staff, so connected to that, we're always looking for ways to save ourselves time and create a smoother and faster workflow. Trying to maximize Excel formulas and even saving data points and notes in EndNote records have been particularly huge time savers for us. With our users, we have the most success and the most receptivity with one-on-one conversations. A lot of times they'll actually catch us walking outside of the library, if we're in the cafeteria or going to another event, and a lot of organic conversations spring from that. So with these projects, lots of people at the Institute who might otherwise have never contacted the library were able to see how much work we could do for them. Lastly, we were able to leverage our increased involvement with these projects into bumping one of our staff from part-time to full-time. In that role, she helps all of us during these reviews. So we are really grateful to have her around more. Ideally, in the future, we'd love to add another full-time role for this kind of work. Bibliometrics practices are always changing and requests are always evolving. So we know there will always be more work for us to do and trends for us to learn. That's all I have for you today, and I would be delighted to hear about the discussions or questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Sharon. There are a lot of questions. All right. Yeah, okay. The first one is about the size of the population that you serve. So how many researchers are you serving?
So for the PIs, we have about 75 to 80.
Okay, great. And then the one that is related to it is that, so what's the rationale behind urging PIs to have both ORCID ID and Researcher ID?
That is a great question. The easy answer is because that's what senior leadership said. The longer answer is that those tools can do different things, and the leadership wants to be able to pull from both of those. So a lot of outside organizations require ORCID, so it just made sense to mandate that across the board. And then with Researcher ID, there's a lot of easy ways to visualize your publications and your metrics that other tools don't have.
All right. So next one is, did you have the researchers enable cross-ref for auto updates in ORCID profile?
That is such a good question. So we sometimes mentioned cross-ref. To be honest with you, we generally didn't get to that level of detail. With the average person, the average interaction, they usually already had the MyNCBI, but we had to set up 2 separate accounts for them, and that took a lot of explaining itself. So we generally didn't have any time to get beyond that.
And do you also act as delegates for PIs in My Bibliography or ORCID?
Mostly no, because it would set a precedent that we would just not be able to maintain.
And what about the profiles of researchers who already left academia? Do you still consider those?
I'm sorry, who have already left academia?
The researchers. The profiles of the researchers who have who left academia. And do you consider those?
If they've left an NIEHS, is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Okay. Once they leave the institute, then the library would not track any of those metrics. The only way that we might interact with it is when they list NIEHS as, if they mistakenly list it as their current affiliation in an article, we might reach out to them about that, but that would not factor in on a bibliometrics level.
Okay, so this is a different thread of a question. Could you comment on using first-last author for primary authorship versus using corresponding author?
Sure, that's a good question. So we've never gotten a request for tracking corresponding authors, and as far as I know, that's not a field you can easily search within PubMed or Web of Science, which is what we're primarily using to find publications. So first and last author is the metric that we care about. When we're finding it, it's usually easier simply to look at the publications we've already found, but I usually rerun the search in PubMed just to be safe, to make sure I haven't missed anything.
Thank you. I think the last question has to do how you increase the visibility of the service. So how does the interaction with the users change in times of COVID?
Right. So I actually looked at metrics for this just the other day, and we have had, compared to last year from March to the end of September, our services and the number of interactions we've had has increased. Expected things have gone down, like book loan requests, but at least half of the services we provide have shot up. A lot of people have more time outside of the laboratory to do things like literature searches and to manage their publications and think about when their next review is going to happen. So we have done a lot of work with this. And because the author ID projects, those happened, it's been over the course of a couple of years. But we were working on that, through 2018 and 2019. It's fresh in their minds that this is a service we can provide for them, or at least if they have questions, we can answer them.
Thank you. I think that's all from the chat.
Great.
Well, thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Sharon, for a great presentation, and thanks again to everyone in the chat for being so engaged. Obviously, you can continue. We'll leave the session open for you, and you're happy to carry on the conversations there. So once again, we're going to take another 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 1:30 with a session on what it is that we're actually measuring when we measure citation. So hope you'll stick around or tune back in for that. So thanks, everyone.